Hi, I'm CSK, and this is Psychology. This is a continuation of another video I did. It's aptly named Part 1, so if you want to see that, I'll put a link in the description, and there'll probably be a link in the description to Part 3. To begin, Leitonen reports that males have really small gametes, sperm, and females have very large gametes, eggs. The difference between males and females may seem very obvious, but it's very important in understanding intersexual and intrasexual selection. So I'd like you to imagine an Xbox. Imagine that me and my friend really want to play Xbox, but we don't have an Xbox and we don't have any games, so we're not that bright. I buy an Xbox and he buys some games. When we want to play, it wouldn't make sense for me to bring the whole Xbox over to him to play, because it's really heavy. Instead, it would make more sense for him to bring the games over to the Xbox. So understanding this difference, we understand why men bring their sperm to the egg. Because the sperm are much smaller than the egg. They're lighter. It's economic. As mentioned in the introduction of an article by Narwhal, men have very little investment because all they really have to, is bring the sperm. On the other hand, since females have to first carry the egg, carry the sperm, carry the fetus, carry the infant, they have a very large comparative investment. So the best way for a man to try to get the most out of his genes would likely be to impregnate all the women he can find. A female, on the other hand, would have a large investment. So they would try to make the investment worth it. So they'd pick a man with good genes or a man that will help their children grow up and make them more successful. Basically, using the same analogy before, if my Xbox was faulty and it only ejected games after I completed it, I would have to be very picky about which games went into my Xbox. If it was a game I didn't want, it would be really bad for me to be stuck with it. It would be a bad investment of my time. On the other hand, if my friends all had good games, one had BioShock Infinite, another had GTA 5, they would have to compete to see who gets access to my Xbox. And that is very similar to intrasexual selection, competing for access to females. Furthermore, if they had access to many Xboxes, they would just stick their games in all the different Xboxes and they could have the benefit of playing any one they want. As I mentioned before, this works on averages and it's never true in every case. Men are more likely to compete for access to females while women are more likely to be choosy about which males they'll mate with. This would imply that men are more likely to accept sexual invitations, which was found in Hall's replication of Clark and Hatfield's study. They found that men are more likely to consent to go to a woman's bed than a woman is to consent to go to a man's bed. So there is an overall difference between males and females. But there is a further distinction dependent on whether they're looking for short-term or long-term mates. In the short term, men would look for cues of sexual promiscuity, which meant sexual access. They would also look for cues of fertility, such as younger age, around 20, health markers such as full lips, clear or smooth skin, clear eyes, lustrous hair, symmetry, good muscle tone, and absence of lesions. Basically, men look for attractive females, which is actually why those markers are attractive. But getting back to fertility, the main fertility indicator is waist-to-hip ratio. In a 1993 article by Singh, he found that men rated women with low waist-to-hip ratios as more attractive. This was regardless of the body weight of the female. A second part of the study involved examining fat distributions on Miss America winners and Playboy Playmates, proving that this was the most bro study ever. They also found that men looking for short-term mates would look for women with low investment requirements. This is supposedly to keep from short-term mates turning into long-term mates, arguably a very classy move. To go back for a second to men looking for attractive partners, Buss's 1990 article found that women insult other women by insulting their appearance. Men, on the other hand, who are generally more focused on resources, are more likely to insult other men by insulting their capabilities to accrue resources. So men looking for short-term partners look for promiscuity, they look for fertility, they look for health, they look for a low investment. That's pretty much it. On the other hand, men who are looking for long-term relationships are actually more likely to be given access to higher quality females because they require more investment. A comparison is Blu-ray discs. You pay more for them because they're higher quality and you haven't learned how to torrent video. Keep in mind in this example, I'm not saying that women are objects. So with a higher investment, the man is more likely to get access to a higher genetically valuable woman, and thus they are probably going to have more genetically valuable children. This would be very good if you want to pass your genes along. A negative of this long-term strategy, however, is that men can suffer from paternity uncertainty. They don't really 100% know that that child is theirs. They could be investing in another man's genes. So those are men's strategies. There's also the female strategies. For women, a short-term strategy may be used for a variety of different reasons. One reason is that it can be beneficial for gaining access to immediate resources. Another reason for using a short-term strategy is that a woman could learn about the man's capability of being a good long-term partner. It is kind of like test driving a car. A woman using a short-term strategy could also gain access to more genetically valuable men, because generally more genetically valuable men don't need to invest as much, on average. Basically, by this theory, men who have good genes and who are attractive don't have to employ commitment to the extent of unattractive men or men with bad genes. So those are the short-term strategies of female, and I want to repeat that although an adaptation may have used to be useful, that doesn't mean it is still useful today. So now we'll go on to talk about the long-term mating strategies of women. According to Buss's 1989 article, women would look for resources in long-term mating strategies. Thus often they would look for older men who had been given more time to accrue resources. One unsupported reason for this is the structural powerlessness hypothesis as described by Weiderman. This hypothesis proposes that women only look for men with high resources because society has placed them at a disadvantage of gaining resources. However, this idea hasn't been supported. One study of college students found that women with higher expected incomes placed more emphasis on mating partners with higher incomes. Furthermore, since men are generally intrasexual competitors, they generally have higher muscle masses on their upper body so they can fight other men. In a long-term mating strategy, females may choose these more muscular men because they offer protection from other men or dangerous animals. So seeing this large difference in men and females mating strategies, it's no surprise that there's different phenomenon associated with both men and women. In Haselton's article, he discusses both the prisoner dilemma of sexual deception and sexual inference. In regards to sexual deception, a woman can 1. Believe a man is faithful and he is. 2. Believe a man is faithful and he isn't. 3. Believe a man isn't faithful and he is. 4. Believe a man is faithful and he isn't. So this is where the mechanism of sexual deception comes into play. Out of these 4 strategies, it is most environmentally important for a woman to believe that a man isn't going to be faithful. This is because it will warn her against impending withdrawal of resources. That is why on average, women often think men are unfaithful in their relationships. This is not true of every case, but it's an evolutionarily supported mechanism. On the other hand, for sexual inference, a man can 1. Think a woman doesn't want to have sex when she does. 2. Think a woman doesn't want to have sex when she doesn't. 3. Think she wants to have sex and she does. 4. Think she wants to have sex and she doesn't. This is the mechanism known as sexual inference, a mechanism most common in men. From an evolutionary perspective, it is worse for a man to think that a woman doesn't want to have sex. This is because if he thinks she doesn't want to have sex, likely he's not going to get sex. On the other hand, if a man thinks a woman does want to have sex, there's a theoretical 50% chance that he will get sex. Either she does want sex, and he thinks she wants sex, and they have sex. Woo, sex! In the other case, a man thinks a woman does want to have sex and she doesn't, and no sex. Poor him. So evolution has taught men to infer sex more than females infer sex. This is so they don't miss opportunities of having sex and passing on their genes. And with that, we've talked about mating strategies, we've talked about sexual mechanisms. Why are there 2 sexes? The most obvious answer is so they can reproduce. But why did 2 sexes evolve in the first place? Sex can cause dangerous combinations of genes and males are highly superfluous. So why do we have a whole 50% of the population unable to reproduce? The answer comes via Brockhurst's article on Leigh Van Valen's theory. His theory is the Red Queen hypothesis, a hypothesis based off Alice in Wonderland. Alice and the Red Queen run as fast as they can, but they never seem to get anywhere because they're moving as fast as each other. This was used as an analogy of adaptations. Predator and prey may adapt, they may change, but if they're changing as fast as each other, they're never going to be sufficiently better than the other one. But this is where sex comes into play. With sexual reproduction, random gene combinations get created with a higher frequency, and thus species will adapt faster. So that's why there's 2 sexes. For part 3, click the link in the description. References are down there in a Google Doc. Like and subscribe if you want to watch me say words and other words and stare awkwardly at a camera.